Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're diving deep into vitamin D. It's a topic that seems like it's just everywhere these days. And you guys shared an interview with Dr. Beatrix Schweiger, an expert on vitamin D from the Sunday Natural YouTube channel. And wow, it was packed with insights.
Yeah, it seems like vitamin D is something that everyone's talking about, but there are still a lot of misconceptions floating around out there.
For sure. Like we always hear about it being the sunshine vitamin, right? But get this,
Yeah.
it's not even a vitamin at all. It's actually a hormone. And honestly, a lot of us are probably deficient even if we think we're getting enough sun.
That's absolutely right. And Dr. Schweiger actually does a really good job of explaining why that is. And it has a lot to do with, just our modern lifestyles.
So in this deep dive, we're going to break down exactly why vitamin D is so crucial for our health, what those optimal levels actually look like, and how you can be sure you're getting the right amount. So let's start with this whole vitamin versus hormone thing. What's the difference there and why does it even matter?
Well, a vitamin is basically something that our bodies need but can't actually produce on their own. So we have to get it from our diet. But a hormone, on the other hand, is something that our bodies produce themselves, and it acts as a chemical messenger, and it's regulating all these different bodily functions.
Okay, that makes sense. So vitamin D is made in our skin when it's exposed to sunlight. So it's a hormone, not something that we need to eat. But why is that distinction so important? Like, why do we care?
Well, because it actually changes how we think about vitamin D's role in the body. It's not just some passive nutrient that's just hanging out. It's an active regulator, and it's influencing a huge range of processes, especially our immune system.
Oh, wow, I see. And Dr. Schweiger talks a lot about this concept of immunomodulation.
Yeah.
So can you break that down for us? Like, what does that actually mean?
Sure. So think of your immune system like an army, right? You want it to be strong enough to defend against any invaders, things like viruses and bacteria, but you also don't want it to be overreacting and attacking your own body, which happens with autoimmune diseases.
So it's all about finding that balance.
Exactly. And that's where vitamin D steps in because it's acting as this regulator that's helping to fine tune the immune response. So on one hand, it's actually helping prevent an overactive immune system, which is huge in preventing those autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or even Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And then on the other hand, it's ensuring that our immune system is strong enough to fight off infections like the flu or even just the common cold.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about just boosting the immune system. It's about making sure it's actually working properly.
Yeah.
So we're not just protecting ourselves from colds. We're potentially even lowering our risk of developing some pretty serious autoimmune diseases.
This is blowing my mind, and we're just getting started. Okay, so we know we get vitamin D from sunlight, but Dr. Schweiger pointed out that a ton of people are actually deficient. So why is that? I mean, even I was thinking hey, I go outside, I must be good, but apparently that's not always the case. Yeah, you're right. It is way more complicated than just spending time outdoors. So Dr. Schweiger highlighted a few key factors. First, the angle of the sun matters. We actually need UVB rays specifically to produce vitamin D, and those rays aren't as strong during certain times of the year, especially in those winter months, or if you live further from the equator.
So like where you live can actually impact your vitamin D levels.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Latitude plays a big role. And even if you do live in a sunny place, things like sunscreen, while super important for skin health, they also block those UVB rays.
Oh, wow. So even if I'm spending like hours at the beach slathered up in sunscreen, I'm probably not making much vitamin D.
It's definitely something to consider. And we also can't forget about our modern lifestyles. We spend a lot of time indoors, whether we're working or commuting or just relaxing at home. We're simply just not getting the same amount of sun exposure as people did in the past.
It's true. It's almost like we're programmed to avoid the sun now. We work inside all day and then come home and just binge watch our favorite shows.
Yeah.
And Dr. Schweiger even mentioned that, air pollution might be playing a role too in blocking those UVB rays. But she did say that more research is needed on that. It's just another factor to think about.
Right. It's all connected, isn't it? Our lifestyle choices, where we live, even the environment, all of these things can impact our vitamin D levels.
Okay, so let's say we're not getting enough vitamin D from sunlight. How do we know if we're actually deficient? I know blood tests are involved, but it sounds like just being within range isn't the whole story.
You're right. It's not just about passing the test, it's about thriving, right? And Dr. Schweiger actually had a really great analogy for this. She compared blood test ranges to school grades. You can totally pass with a C, but you're not exactly excelling, are you? And when it comes to vitamin D, we want to be aiming for that A+ trait.
Okay, so how do we even figure out where we stand grade-wise? What kind of blood test should we actually be asking for?
The test you want to look for is called the 25-hydroxyvitamin D test. This measures the amount of vitamin D that's actually stored in your body. And sometimes you might see another test called 1025-dihydroxyvitamin D, but that's more for like specialized situations, and it doesn't reflect your overall vitamin D status.
Got it. So 25-hydroxyvitamin D, that's the one. But even when you get the right test, it sounds like there's some confusion about what those numbers actually mean. So what are those optimal levels that we should be aiming for?
That's a great question. So the optimal range for 25-hydroxyvitamin D is actually between 40 and 60 NNGLO. Now, some labs might use different units called ONMOL. So if you see that on your results, the optimal range is going to be 100 to 150.
Okay, so I'm taking notes here. 40 to 60 NGLEA or 100 to 150 NGLEL. That's the sweet spot. But here's another question that comes up all the time. Is more always better? Like, can you actually have too much vitamin D?
That's where things can get a little tricky. Because vitamin D is fat soluble, meaning our bodies store it so you can have too much. And if you have excessive intake, it can lead to elevated calcium levels in your blood, which can actually be problematic for your kidneys and blood vessels.
Okay, so we need enough vitamin D, but not too much. Makes sense. I'm already seeing why personalized dosing is so important here. But before we even dive into that, I'm curious about something else Dr. Schweiger mentioned. These cofactors that work with vitamin D. What are those and why are they important?
So cofactors are basically helper nutrients that assist in the absorption, the metabolism, or the function of another nutrient. And in the case of vitamin D, magnesium and zinc are particularly important.
Okay, so I know magnesium is good for sleep and muscle relaxation, and zinc is good for immune function. But how do they specifically relate to vitamin D? Like, what do they actually do?
Well, magnesium is actually involved in activating vitamin D in the body. So think of it like turning on a light switch. Without magnesium, vitamin D can't really do its job.
Oh, wow. So even if I'm taking a vitamin D supplement, if I'm low in magnesium, it might not even be working as well as it could.
Exactly. And zinc is important too, as it actually helps the vitamin D receptor function properly. Think of the receptor as a lock and vitamin D as the key. So zinc helps that lock work smoothly so vitamin D can unlock its full potential.
I'm sensing a pattern here. It's not just about vitamin D in isolation. It's about making sure all the pieces of the puzzle are in place.
Absolutely. There's also this common misconception about vitamin K2 and its relationship with vitamin D. Many people actually think you need to take them together, but that's not entirely true.
Really? I see those supplements marketed together all the time. So what's the deal with vitamin K2 then?
Vitamin K2 is important for calcium regulation. It helps to direct calcium to your bones where it's needed, while also preventing it from building up in soft tissues like arteries where it can cause problems.
Well, it's more about balancing calcium, not directly impacting vitamin D itself.
Exactly. While vitamin D promotes calcium absorption, vitamin K2 ensures that calcium is actually used effectively and doesn't end up in the wrong places. They work together, but vitamin D can function without K2.
Okay, that clears up a lot of confusion. I think a lot of people, myself included, were operating under the assumption that you had to take vitamin K2 with vitamin D. But it sounds like it's more of an optional add-on for like specific concerns like bone health.
Exactly. Now, there's one more piece of the puzzle that Dr. Schweiger introduces, and it's kind of a game changer when it comes to understanding and optimizing vitamin D.
Ooh, okay, I'm all ears. What is it?
It's a hormone called parathyroid hormone, or PTH for short.
PTH. That doesn't sound familiar. What does it do?
PTH is like a sensor for calcium levels in your blood. So when calcium levels are low, PTH is released to bring them back up. And here's where it gets really interesting in relation to vitamin D. PTH acts as an indirect marker of how effective your vitamin D is at a cellular level.
Whoa, hold on. So PTH tells us how well our bodies are actually using the vitamin D we have.
Exactly. And this is where that concept of high and low responders comes in. Some people might actually need much higher doses of vitamin D to achieve the same effect as others. And PTH testing can help to identify if you're someone who needs a higher dose.
Wow, this is starting to sound a lot more complicated than just popping a vitamin D pill.
It is a bit more nuanced. But that's why Dr. Schweiger's approach is so valuable. She's not about those blanket recommendations. She's about understanding individual needs. And PTH testing can be a really key tool in that process.
This is so fascinating. I had no idea PTH was even a thing, let alone that it could tell us so much about our vitamin D status.
It's not something that's routinely checked, unfortunately, but it can provide some incredibly valuable information.
So to sum all this up, vitamin D is a powerful hormone that plays a huge role in our overall health. But a lot of us aren't getting enough, and there's more to it than just taking a supplement. We need to be mindful of our lifestyles, where we live, and even consider getting those PTH levels checked. It's about personalized optimization, right?
Right. It's about understanding the nuances of vitamin D and working with your body, not against it.
This is incredible. We've covered so much ground already, but I feel like we're just scratching the surface. We'll dive even deeper into personalized dosing and action steps in part 2 of this deep dive. So stay tuned. Welcome back to part 2 of our deep dive into vitamin D. I feel like we uncovered some pretty fascinating insights in part 1, like the fact that vitamin G is actually a hormone, the role of PTH in understanding our individual needs, and how important those cofactors like magnesium and zinc are.
It's amazing, right? How much we think we know about something like vitamin D, but then when you really delve into the research, there's this whole world of complexity and nuance.
Totally. And that complexity is exactly why we need this more personalized approach. But how do we actually put all of this knowledge into action? Like, where do we even begin?
Well, like we talked about earlier, the first step is getting tested. We need to actually know where our vitamin D levels are currently at before we can make any informed decisions about supplementation.
Okay, so we're talking about the 25-hydroxy vitamin D test. And ideally, we're getting that checked twice a year at the end of summer and winter to account for those seasonal variations.
Exactly. Knowing your baseline is so crucial. And while you're at it, request the parathyroid hormone, or PTH test as well. It's not always included in standard blood work, but it gives you a much deeper understanding of how your body is actually using vitamin D at a cellular level.
Okay, so testing is our foundation. But while we're waiting for those results, can we start supplementing with vitamin D? And if so, like, how much should we be taking?
Yeah, so Dr. Schweiger recommends starting with a safe dose of around 2,000 to 2,500 IU per day. This is a good starting point for most people, but again, it's just a starting point.
Right. It feels like a theme is emerging here. It's all about finding that sweet spot for our own individual needs.
Exactly. Once you have those test results, you can work with your healthcare provider to adjust your dosage based on your current levels, your health goals, and how you're feeling.
So we're not just blindly following some generic recommendation. We're using our own data to guide our decisions.
I love that. Now, you mentioned that some people might actually need significantly higher doses of vitamin D than others. So why is that?
There are a few reasons for this variation in individual needs. Some people might have genetic differences that affect how their bodies absorb and utilize vitamin D. Others might have underlying health conditions or lifestyle factors that impact their vitamin D status. For example, people with obesity tend to have lower vitamin D levels, even if they're taking supplements, because vitamin D gets stored in fat tissue, making it less available in the bloodstream.
That makes sense. It's like each of us has this unique vitamin D puzzle, and we need to figure out what pieces are missing and how to put them together.
Exactly. And remember those cofactors we talked about earlier? Magnesium and zinc. They play such a huge role in supporting vitamin D's function. Right. Magnesium is like the on switch for vitamin D, and zinc helps those vitamin D receptors work properly. So even if we're taking a vitamin D supplement, if we're deficient in magnesium or zinc, we might not be reaping the full benefits.
That's right. It's all about working synergistically. It's like a team effort.
I like to think of it as a well-coordinated dance. Each nutrient has its own role to play, and when they're all in sync, the dance is beautiful and everything flows smoothly.
Oh, I love that analogy. And it really highlights the importance of a holistic approach to health. We can't just focus on one nutrient in isolation. We need to consider the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And speaking of the bigger picture, there's something else Dr. Schweiger mentioned that I found super interesting. She talked about the therapeutic potential of vitamin D, particularly in the context of autoimmune diseases like multiple sclerosis. She even mentioned a specific protocol called the Coimbra protocol. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. So the Coimbra protocol is a treatment approach for autoimmune diseases that involves using high doses of vitamin D under strict medical supervision. It was developed by Dr. Cicero Gali Coimbra in Brazil, and it's based on the idea that autoimmune diseases are caused by an overactive immune system, and that high doses of vitamin D can actually help modulate and regulate that immune response.
Okay, so it's like using vitamin D as this powerful tool to retrain the immune system.
Exactly. And while the Coimbra protocol is still considered experimental and it requires really careful monitoring by a qualified healthcare professional, it's actually showing some really promising results for some people with autoimmune conditions like MS, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and even psoriasis.
Wow, that's amazing. So while we're not saying that everyone should go out and start megadosing on vitamin D, it does highlight the fact that vitamin D is so much more than just this simple nutrient for bone health. It has the potential to be this really powerful therapeutic tool.
Right. And it's important to remember that the Coimbra protocol is a very specific approach and should only be undertaken under the guidance of a medical professional who is experienced in this treatment.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good reminder that we always encourage our listeners to do their own research, consult with their healthcare providers, and make informed decisions about their own health.
I couldn't agree more. But hey, armed with the information we've discussed today, you're already well on your way to understanding the complexities of vitamin D and how it can really impact your health.
This deep dive has been so eye-opening for me. I feel like we've peeled back the layers of what we thought we knew about vitamin D and discovered a whole new world of possibilities. But with all this information swirling around, I think it's helpful to break it down into some actionable steps. Like, what can our listeners actually do right now to optimize their vitamin D levels?
Great question. Let's put it all together in part 3.
Okay, so it's action plan time. We've explored this whole fascinating world of vitamin D, busted some myths, and I think really uncovered the importance of that personalized approach. So now let's translate all of this knowledge into concrete steps that you can actually take to optimize those vitamin D levels.
Love it. Let's give our listeners a clear roadmap.
Perfect. So first things first, we got to get tested. Remember, we're looking for that 25-hydroxy vitamin D test, not the 1025-dihydroxy version. And ideally, we're getting this tested 2 times a year, at the end of summer and then winter, to see how those levels fluctuate throughout the year.
Exactly. Knowing your baseline is so important. And while you're at it, go ahead and request that parathyroid hormone or PTH test as well. It's not always included in the standard blood work, but it gives you a much deeper understanding of how your body is responding to vitamin D at a cellular level.
Okay, so testing is like our foundation. But while we're waiting for those results to come back, is it okay to start supplementing with vitamin D?
Yeah, absolutely. It's generally safe to start with a dose of around 2,000 to 2,500 IU each day. Now, this is a good starting point for most people, but again, it's just a starting point.
Right, because once you actually have those test results back, then you can really fine-tune that dosage based on your individual needs.
Exactly. You might need more, you might need less. It all depends on your current levels, your health goals, and how you're feeling.
And let's not forget about those super important cofactors, magnesium and zinc. They're like vitamin D's best friends, helping it do its thing in the body.
For sure. Magnesium helps to actually activate vitamin D, and then zinc supports those vitamin D receptors. So make sure you're getting enough of those nutrients as well, whether it's through your diet or supplementation.
This has been such a cool journey. We've gone from thinking of vitamin D as just this boring nutrient for our bones to really understanding its role as this powerful hormone that impacts everything from our immune system to even our mood and energy levels.
It's really remarkable how much research has revealed about vitamin D in recent years. And honestly, I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface.
You know, it really makes you wonder, what other simple yet powerful health hacks are out there just waiting to be discovered? If optimizing our vitamin D levels can have such a profound impact on our well-being, imagine what else we might be able to unlock with a little bit of knowledge and effort.
That's such an exciting thought. And it really just underscores the importance of staying curious, asking questions, and always seeking to expand our understanding of how our bodies work.
Well said. So to our amazing listener out there, keep diving deep, keep questioning, and keep unlocking your own health potential. And hey, if you uncover any fascinating vitamin D insights along the way, we would love to hear about them. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.